Return of the Marcoses, how Philippines' corrupt dynasty rebuilt its power. ABC News Australia, foreign correspondent, 5th of May 2022.
In the Philippines, the most important election in a generation is about to take place. The namesake son of dictator Ferdinand Marcos is poised to be president. Marcos Jr.'s rise has divided the nation and become a referendum on fact versus fiction. Fueling it all is a social media machine that's rewriting history. How is social media influencing this election?
It will determine who wins. I mean, how crazy is that, right?
The young ones, they don't know that this happened, and they believe that the Marcoses had a good government.
All of these lies against the Marcos are all propaganda.
In Tarlac City, 2 hours north of Manila, the streets hum with a familiar cry. Presidential candidate Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is in town, and thousands of local fans have come to support him. Known as Bongbong or BBM, his initials are more than a catchy slogan. They're part of an elaborate effort to distance the Marcos family from their brutal history.
Marcos have done something that people would disagree, but there are still a lot of positives. So for me, that's the reason why I'm still supporting Bongbong. Why not give it a try, right?
People have been turning up here since dawn just to catch a glimpse of the man that they hope will be the next president of the Philippines. The excitement here is incredible when you think this family was run out of the Philippines a few decades ago. But the Marcoses never went away, and they've been masterful at using social media to attract a new generation of supporters who don't know or remember the dark reality of the Marcos Sr. dictatorship.
Shout out sa 3K viewers mga kabigpino. So again, don't forget to share our live stream mga kabigpino.
Marcos Jr. avoids journalists, preferring vloggers like Ruben Helio, who live stream, comment and post only positive messages about him. Do you think you're more powerful than the mainstream media following the campaign?
I think so, because some of the media is so biased about Marcos, and they never show anything that Bongbong Marcos a good did. And as bloggers, we show the other side of the coin to the people. This is the real Marcos, not the one that mainstream said.
Marcos Jr.'s got more than 10 million followers across Facebook, YouTube, TikTok and Twitter. His campaign is turbocharged by his own social media team, who produce hours of videos reframing the Marcos story.
If there is one thing that I think clearly sets my father apart, it's that he had a very clear vision for our country. He viewed his work as president as one of nation building, of building up our country to make it better.
Ay sa palagay ko, ikita natin gaganda ang buhay ng bawat mamamayang Pilipino at gaganda ang ating ginagawa.
Leading polls with 56% support, Marcos Jr. seems unstoppable. One of the Marcos campaign's staunchest allies is this man.
Ay isang abogado! Hindi lang abogado kundi isang matapang, may paninindigan at walang inuurong ang abogado. Attorney Larry Gadon!
Vying for a Senate seat in these elections, Larry Gadon is a fixture at Marcos rallies.
Sabihin, hindi na kayo naniniwala sa mga paninira kay Bongbong Marcos, mga propaganda. Ang mga taga-kapas ay hindi!
The suspended lawyer is notorious for his crude, violent and sexist language, but the Marcos Jr. campaign says he's been loyal. How did you feel when Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was removed from power?
I was crying for a whole week. I wasn't able to go out of the house. I was really hurt by what happened to President Marcos.
So do you feel that this is a comeback of sorts?
Yes, Bongbong Marcos is a comeback for the Marcoses. I think people got tired of the mudslinging against the Marcoses. And the people now realize that the best president and the best administration we had was President Marcos.
For 2 decades, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. and his wife Imelda ruled like king and queen. Although he was elected in 1965 and again in 69, the charismatic couple were a package deal. Initially, the economy grew under Marcos and the president spent big on infrastructure, but cracks appeared.
He has proclaimed himself president, prime minister, chief of the armed forces and one-man government all in one.
In 1972, toward the end of his final term in office, Marcos Sr. declared martial law.
Elections have been cancelled. Criticism of his actions and his regime has been outlawed. His political opponents have been jailed.
Thousands were murdered, tortured or disappeared, while Ferdinand and Imelda blew millions on property, fine art and jewellery. By 1986, the Philippines could take no more.
The economy is in ruins. The country has been bitterly divided emotionally and politically.
A popular uprising driving the Marcoses into exile, where Marcos Sr. later died.
So what are the updates about the case you filed? Of course, we suspect that it's going to come out in favor of Marcos.
Tina Bawagan and Etta Rosales are sisters. Both were arrested and tortured during martial law, and both have devoted their lives to holding the Marcos dictatorship to account.
So we're going to file to appeal this to the Supreme Court. Because if you don't, you're stupid.
The sisters come from a military family. Tina was in primary school when Marcos Sr. became president.
We had a pretty good life. My mother used to campaign for Marcos because she and my father knew him personally. She soon learned of his corruption.
Tina was 27 and a member of the underground resistance to the Marcos regime when she was detained by soldiers.
I was seated on a chair, handcuffed. Then they started asking questions. None of my answers satisfied him, so he slapped my face. Then he'd slap me again, slap, slap, slap. And then they would put a sharp object over my chest. And then they would fondle my breasts. And then the worst of it was that they put an object inside my vagina. And I shouted, but it was like no one could hear.
The physical torture only stopped when soldiers got word of her family's military connections, but Tina remained in detention for a month.
There's so many other stories, a lot more horrible than mine. I know of some women who were raped, but they cannot tell it because there's a stigma. It's important to tell it again and again and again because so many of our countrymen don't know it anymore. The young ones, they don't know that this happened. And they believe that the Marcoses Marcos had a good government, a benevolent government, that we were fine then. We have to continue to tell the story so that it doesn't happen again.
At a quiet shrine in the capital, those who fought against the Marcos regime are remembered. Despite many eyewitness accounts and official reports about the violence, Larry Gadon dismisses it all.
That is all propaganda.
No one was killed, disappeared, or
Those are rebels. They choose to fight the government then. If they die, that's their fault. Don't tell me you will fight the government and you will just receive a slap on your face.
They were fighting a dictatorship.
Those are propaganda. We are all free during that time. Majority of the Filipino people do not believe those lies, those propaganda of human rights violations. Otherwise, they would not go to BBM's rallies.
Storm signals are now off as Agaton intensifies into a tropical storm. Expect gale-force winds in Leyte.
On the island of Leyte in the central Philippines, people have a special place in their heart for the Marcoses. Imelda Marcos grew up here, in Tacloban, where her family dominates local politics.
Ang sunod na presidente ng Republika ng Pilipinas, President Ferdinand Bagong Lipunan!
Maraming salamat po. Napakainit ng salubong. Masarap talagang makauwi ulit dito sa Tacloban at kayo'y makasama.
Tonight's rally is a family affair. Marcos Jr.'s 3 sons are beloved on social media, and this time he's brought his youngest, Vincent, along.
O yan na naman, wala na naman pumapansin sa akin. Lahat nakatingin kay Vincent. Kayo talaga, oh. Siguradong nanonood ng live stream ang aking ina. Kumustahin natin si Imelda. Hello, Imelda!
This is how dynasties are made. If Marcos Jr. pulls this election victory off, the family will emerge as the most powerful political clan in the country.
At ang ating pinag-uusapan na tagumpay ay hindi lamang ang tagumpay sa darating na halalan sa bayan. Ang tunay na tagumpay na masasabi natin, nandito tayo, mga Pilipino, at sama-sama po tayo papangon muli. Maraming salamat. Damo, salamat.
Anong gagawin mo pag nanalo si BBM?
Tatawa ng malakas. Sa wakas, BBM na rin. Kasi dapat naman talaga si BBM nung 2016. May dalyang kasing naganap. Kaya nga balas na balas kami.
Chami Rivas was born in Tacloban, and like so many people I spoke to, her loyalty to the Marcoses goes back generations.
Kasi maganda naman, sabi nga nila, maganda naman daw yung kay Marcos Sr. noon. Based na rin sa sa story ng lola ko. Lola ko kasi is patay na nga lang. Sa kwento niya, maganda daw noon sa nanay ko. Sabi niya maganda rin daw mga tita ko. Ganun. Tapos kung halimbawa si Bongbong ang manalo sa ngayon, maganda rin siguro.
She spends about 5 hours on social media a day, and it's reinforced her views about the Marcos family.
Based lang kasi sa mga naririnig ko, sa mga matatanda, nababasa ko sa Facebook, gano'n.
At sinabi, kasi daw yung pera na yon ay kay Marcos at yun daw ninakaw sa taong bayan. Can you imagine that? Ang pagbabaliktad na ginawa nila, bida kasi may.
The platform is awash with videos like this, which claim the Marcoses weren't corrupt.
Yung corruption, kung sa akin, paano naman nila nasasabing corrupt ba? Sabi nga, nabasa ko rin talaga na ang Marcos mayaman naman talaga bago pa siya maging presidente.
Percent of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. Facebook is our internet.
Journalist Maria Ressa is a founder of news outlet Rappler and a fighter in the global war against disinformation.
There were definitely Marcos networks of disinformation. A lot of them were taken down, but then they've regenerated. And this will help pave the way for a win. The elections in the Philippines on May 9th are emblematic of everything that is wrong, right? How does Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the son of a dictator who was ousted in a people power revolt 36 years earlier, how can history have been changed so drastically with the help of social media platforms?
For years, Maria Ressa and her team have been mapping the spread of disinformation networks in the Philippines.
When we looked at this over time, from 2016 all the way to 2022, what we saw was that these networks began to take over the center of the information ecosystem and slowly push out the traditional news groups. And these news organizations that thought they had tremendous power were essentially pushed to the side, and the center of the information ecosystem was taken over by disinformation networks.
In January, Twitter suspended more than 300 accounts and hashtags promoting Marcos Jr.'s campaign. The company found they breached its rules on spam and manipulation.
You cannot have integrity of elections if you don't have integrity of facts. And what social media has done is not only to make facts debatable, but to actually spread lies faster and further than facts.
Ruben, tell me, what time is it in New York?
It's 7:25 in New York, p.m.
Lawyer Ruben Carranza was a government investigator charged with tracking down the billions of dollars stolen by the Marcoses and their associates.
One estimate that the commission I served in continues to use is somewhere between $5 billion to as much as $10 billion.
How did they get away with it?
They were able to hide the corruption they committed by using political violence and repression. At the same time, they were able to steal as much as they could because they controlled all levers of power in the state. This was also cruelty. Children were dying of malnutrition. The Marcoses went on shopping, stealing, hoarding ill-gotten wealth.
The commission has recovered about $3.3 billion and another $2.4 billion is under litigation. Dozens of cases have been brought against the family. Imelda Marcos was convicted of graft in 2018, but is out on bail and appealing the verdict. She's never gone to jail, a fact which feeds the lie they never stole anything at all.
That's also the reason why Marcos Jr. is running, to make sure that his mother will continue to have the impunity that they've had for decades.
In a sea of presidential aspirants, only one has any chance of stopping a Marcos Jr. victory. Lenny Robredo beat Marcos Jr. for the vice presidency in 2016, then spent years fighting his official protest of the result.
Kayo po yung testigo namin. Yung mga bumoto po sa akin dito, hindi ko po sinayang yung tiwala ninyo.
Before entering politics, Robredo was a human rights lawyer. She's running for the presidency on an anti-corruption platform and a promise to reduce poverty.
Ating bayan ay hindi nanggagaling sa pera o makinarya. At kami pong...
But she's not cutting through. Only 23% of voters support her. Her running mate is Senator Kiko Pangilinan.
Why do you think so many people are voting for the Marcos campaign?
Unfortunately, we don't think the Googles and the Facebooks and the TikToks are doing enough. We feel they should be doing more. A lot of voters have no time to digest. They're too busy trying to make a living. They're just too busy trying to keep their heads above the water. And so whatever is there that's repeated over and over and over again, they tend to absorb that.
Meron po tayong gaganaping discussion. Kaya tara na, mag-i-start na tayo. Dali! Nay! Magsi-start na po yung natin, discussion.
Yung mga ganitong talakayan po mga kasama ay mahalaga. Lalo na po sa ating mga marami.
For this community in the capital Manila, daily life is a struggle. 1 in 4 Filipinos live in poverty, and disillusionment with politicians is high.
Nalalason yung ating mga kaisipan doon pa sa mga maling balita, sa mga maling history, no?
Jaja Fagoso has been working in this community for 2 years. She's conducting voter education sessions ahead of polling day.
Bawa kasi dito po walang kuryente, wala pong telebisyon, wala rin pong radyo. So ang meron lang po dito yung mga tao, mga cellphone. So kumbaga, yung kung doon na po sila nagbo-browse ng mga news sa Facebook, doon na po sila nakikinig ng mga history sa TikTok, sa YouTube. So,
phone data costs $1, and if you run out of credit, the Facebook newsfeed is free.
So, ganun po kalaki yung mga epekto sa kanila. Dahil sila po, naguguluhan sila doon sa kung ano yung totoo at mali. Kaya, malaki pong epekto yung social media dito sa mga ganitong komunidad. So, dahil po doon, sinasamantala po yun ng mga kandidato, no? Para doon po sila maghasik ng kanilang mga plataforma. Minsan nga po, mga maling balita.
Democracy is so vulnerable because people's minds and emotions are so easy to manipulate. The biggest problem that I see globally is that news organizations lost our gatekeeping powers to tech, and tech abdicated responsibility for protecting the public sphere.
Our requests for an interview with Marcos Jr. have been repeatedly stonewalled, so I decided to try putting some questions to his running mate, Vice Presidential candidate Sara Duterte.
Pagkakaisa nating lahat. Yan po ang unity namin ni Bongbong Marcos at ni Sara Duterte.
She's the daughter of current President Rodrigo Duterte. I wanted to know why these two political dynasties have decided to join forces. We're soon surrounded by security.
It's not that she doesn't want to answer questions, except that these people came out for her.
The reason I asked you what's your questions is because we need to relay the questions to Ma'am Sara, and then
So that you can then vet the questions and decide whether to provide an interview or not. It's an obfuscation tactic by your campaign to avoid hard questions.
Yeah, if we wanted to frustrate you, we wouldn't even approach you now.
On the other side of the city, vlogger Ruben Helio is churning out more Marcos Jr. content.
So Ruben, nag-edit na ng ating ilalabas na balita sa Balitang Pinas. Ayan. Ito si Tom. Hey.
Ruben is the vlog's sole employee. His boss is Jade Cho, who runs the page from his flat.
The mainstream media in the Philippines is a bit sketchy nowadays because they didn't like Bongbong Marcos and even the father of Bongbong Marcos. A lot of people are in the Philippines or even abroad are depending on the vloggers because they report non-edited news such as like what we're doing.
Facebook pages like yours have been accused of spreading misinformation. Do you think you spread misinformation?
No, because I only spread supports for Bongbong Marcos. I didn't say, oh, this other politician, this other presidential aspirant is this or that. I only speak for the support of the Filipinos for Bongbong Marcos. I didn't indulge in negative campaigning as Bongbong Marcos said.
They say the Marcos campaign doesn't pay them, but the ad revenue they generate from Facebook is enough to support them both. Do you see yourself as a Marcos fan first or a businessman first?
Well, I look myself as a supporter, and what I'm doing is what if I earn for what I'm doing is just perks of it. Nabuhay kayo, BBM, sa vloggers, keep up the good works, Filipino stuff, BBM, sabi ni Precious Gem.
Do you feel that you are partly responsible for why he's so popular?
Well, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, maybe.
How does that feel?
Well, it's called in Filipino, it's ambag. It's my way of giving back to the people.
People love you. You can see Bongbong Marcos will win.
Did you ever think that you would see the Marcoses in power again?
Oh no, not at all. Well, at least not in 1986. We were so happy that they left and we thought they would never return.
The brainwashed youth, very brainwashed. It appears the Philippines' Chinese Cardinal Taglay and Pope Francis are supporting the devil, Marcos. What's going on there? The Catholic Church. God bless us all.